record button. Welcome. I am Mark Kashevsky, the director of the Neiswanger Institute for Bioethics and Health Policy. And I'd like to welcome you to the very first lecture in the series that we have named Journeys of Dignity. And this lecture series is going to look at migration through the lens of Catholic social teaching and the history of Jesuit education. And we think this is a particularly opportune time to do this right now. This lecture series was proposed by the Loyola University Chicago Dreamer Committee, which is a university-wide committee of faculty and staff and students who have been meeting for more than a decade to share resources to help support our undocumented immigrant students. And we are at a period of time right now where there is a lot of toxic politics surrounding immigration and a lot of negative rhetoric. And we think that it's important to just remind ourselves of the history and the values in our tradition as a Catholic institution, as a Jesuit institution, that really grounds the way we respond to newcomers to our country. And so this lecture series is going to help place migration within that context. I want to thank our co-sponsors, as I mentioned, the Loyola University Chicago Dreamer Committee, but a special thanks to the Institute for Pastoral Studies. That is really the point unit for this series. Along with the Hank Center for Catholic Intellectual Heritage, the Department of Theology, the Office of Mission Integration, and my unit, the Neiswanger Institute for Bioethics and Health Policy here at the Stritch School of Medicine. As I mentioned, this is the first lecture in this series. The second lecture is scheduled, and I'm putting the information about that into the chat box. And so you can mark your calendars for that. And of course, we will publicize it more as we get closer to the date. For medical students, just a moment of housekeeping here. If you're a med student and you need ethics grand rounds credit just by being here, you're recorded on the roster, and we will attribute the credit to you for being here. If you are a healthcare professional, such as a physician, and would like continuing medical education credit for today's participation, I am putting that information to claim CME credit into the chat box. And now enough housekeeping and on to the fun part of the talk today. Our speakers, we have two distinguished speakers with us. And before I turn it over to them, I'll just say that one of them is Aleja Sastoque Luna, who is a campus minister and the Assistant Director for Faith Formation at Loyola University Chicago's Lakeshore campus. She's been there since 2021 in that role. She holds a Master's of Divinity and a Master's degree in Pastoral Counseling from the Institute of Pastoral Studies here at LUC. And she is joined by Michael Canaris, who is an associate professor at Loyola's Institute for Pastoral Studies and is really the point person on this lecture series and helping us put it together. He's a specialist in ecclesiology, and for our med students, I'll just say ecclesiology is a theological subject matter of the church. What is the church? How does it function? What is its structure? Who is the church? That kind of thing. His areas of research also include Ignatian spirituality, as well as theology and migration. And I will stop the introductions there. I could go on about both of them for a while, but I'll stop just in the interest of time and turn it over to them. So Aleja and Mike, take it away.
Thanks so much, Mark. We're very genuinely honored and excited to launch this new multidisciplinary lecture series focused on issues related to migration in various contexts and settings, especially connecting it with the Catholic social teaching and Ignatian identity. It is, of course, prompted because of current political, social, economic, and ecclesial moments and events, precisely those signs of our times, which the Second Vatican Council Fathers encourage believers to watch, interpret, and respond to. So we've decided to name today's presentation Education and Migration, a double helix of Loyola's spiritual DNA. And as you'll see, the title has a bit of a double meaning, referring to both the namesake figure, Ignatius of Loyola, and the institution. But before we get to that, let's say a little bit about ourselves. I didn't realize Mark would give so much of my background, but I do have it here, and Aleja is going to introduce herself as well. My name is Mike Canaris. I'm a theologian. I'm an associate professor in the IPS, one of the chief units working to organize the series, of course, with help from allied ones across all 4 campuses. And while I'm not myself a Jesuit, Loyola Chicago is the 6th Jesuit university where I've either earned a degree or held a teaching post. I did my dissertation on the work of a Jesuit theologian, directed by a Jesuit cardinal. My 3-year-old daughter's middle name is Montserrat, which is the shrine in Spain that played a significant role in Ignatius's conversion. And now that I have tenure, I can forego all the advice that I got in the interview process and say I have an AMDG tattoo. I was told not to tell people that. But so I'm all in on Jesuit education. And my professional research interests lie at the intersection between ecclesiology, the study of the church, Ignatian mission and formation, and theologies of reception and of migration. So I suppose that's some of the reason why I was asked to lead off these talks. And so with me today is a stellar former student, now turned colleague, Aleja. And so I'll let her say a bit about herself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Aleja Sastoque, Assistant Director in Campus Ministry. As Mark was mentioning before, also IPS alum, so the Loyola spirit runs in my veins too. I'm a spiritual director. I'm proudly Colombian. I'm very passionate to work with youth and young adults. This semester, I'll be teaching with IPS in their Spanish program, a class about young adults and Ignatian spirituality. And as an immigrant, I'm always looking to build bridges that can connect, support, and accompany others in their own journeys. Today, I wouldn't miss the opportunity to talk about the pastoral needs or responses for migration. So here we are with Michael, and I just want to invite Michael to kick us off in this series of talks that wants to embrace journeys of dignity for all of us, especially in today's world.
Great. So the plan, we're going to each share a little bit of content and thought in the beginning of our time together, the bulk of our time together, but hopefully leave room at the end for some conversation. So please start thinking about questions or comments or feedback. We don't want the kind of tumbleweeds blowing across the Zoom screen when we open the floor for dialogue. So first, the most important takeaway, I would say, from our contributions tonight should be this. Neither those of us who claim to inherit and carry forward the vision of Ignatius of Loyola, nor those of us at this particular Chicagoland institution that shares his name, are Johnny-come-latelys to concerns of migration. So we do think that those of any residential status have human dignity, regardless of when or where they were born. We do think that our community does and should prioritize justice-oriented work regarding those who either have come to this country seeking social mobility or security or a better life, or whose families have done so. We do think that such commitments require us to take prophetic stances in our unique contemporary national moment. All of that is true. But these claims are not the result of decisions made in 2024 or 2016 or 2004 or 1986. Rather, we're claiming that this commitment forms part of the double helix of our deeply rooted and embodied spiritual DNA, meaning that the founding of this place and of the order that inspired its establishment were both profoundly concerned with educating people on the move, right from the earliest stages of both, from the earliest stages of the Society of Jesus and the earliest stages of Loyola Chicago. It's not our collective longing to be recognized as one of the prestigious sites of higher education in the United States which motivates us on these points. So Stanford and the University of Chicago can make valid, reasoned arguments on this front as well. But we have something unique to offer. Our twin inherited patrimony, both as a Jesuit school and one that reflects upon the demands of the gospel, while of course reaffirming our commitment to serve people of all faiths and of no faith at all, they give us a unique platform from which to speak to the world and to our national leaders about this growing segment of our human family, where 1 in 6 people are now on the move in some sense, whether as economic migrants, political or climate refugees, internally displaced persons, asylum seekers, or some other category. Of course, this number is projected to grow exponentially as sea levels rise, coastal cities become uninhabitable, and other climate changes render other parts of the globe inhospitable due to temperature, water access, or as we see devastatingly now, wildfires. The Jesuits have long recognized have long been recognized for their dutiful efforts at missionary work among impoverished and marginalized peoples, especially those who have been deemed outcasts, as is reflected in their recent universal apostolic preferences, which are meant to color all of the apostolates in the current decade and in our moment today. They earned this reputation for their efforts prior to the faulty and sanitized accounts of United Statesian history, which I use intentionally because the Americas, plural, are larger than us. But these accounts tend to privilege white Anglo-Protestant founding fathers, especially in terms of religious history and mission. The fabricated and quite prevalent idea that Christianity arrived in New England and the mid-Atlantic colonies first on Puritan ships and then moved southward and westward over the following decades or centuries is patently false. As John O'Leary, SJ, points out in the somewhat melodramatic language of 1950s biography, before anyone had ever dreamt of Jamestown or Plymouth Rock, these men in black soutanes had pushed their way into Georgia. They had settled on 5 different spots in Florida, had ventured into the Carolinas, and had reddened the soil of Virginia with their blood. Actually, the Jesuits were a foundation only 15 years old after being approved by Pope Paul III in 1540, when they sent their men first to the New World. They have been in America ever since. But since Jesuit education is not originally or primarily an American enterprise, its roots concerning this concomitant care to the underserved, not undeserved, but underserved, extend even beyond this New World context. Consider the esteemed Spaniard Juan Alfonso de Polanco, the secretary to Ignatius, for almost 30 years, who in the late 16th century gave some of the following reasons for the establishment and proliferation of Jesuit schools in Europe at the time. Poor boys who could not possibly pay for teachers, much less for private tutors, will make progress in learning, and that their parents will be able to satisfy their obligation to educate their children, one of his goals. Thus, quote, those who are now only students will grow to be pastors, civic officials, administrators of justice, and will fill other important posts to everybody's profit and advantage, end quote. In the earliest days, the schools being founded by the Society of Jesus, from Messina to Majorca to the Roman College, were at Ignatius's insistence open to students of every social class without distinction, because they were generously endowed and they did not charge tuition. The movement towards wealthier student populations in the immediately subsequent years was, according to the dean of Jesuit history, John O'Malley, quote, far, far from the original intention, never actualized in the degree usually attributed to it, and insofar as it occurred, was the result not so much of deliberate choices as of the special nature of the humanistic curriculum, saturated with philosophy, Latin and Greek literary classics, and an appreciation of eloquence, end quote. Though the educational landscape shifted, the Jesuits never abandoned their commitment to the poor, the sojourner, or as many themselves were, the exile. As Jesuit education developed into and then in the wake of the Ratio Studiorum in 1599, it sought to transcend the provincialism of nationalist identity. It was common practice that students from varied backgrounds, locations, and social classes studied together. In his text on their earliest educational endeavors, Michael Foss points out, the Jesuits took great care that their schooling should reflect the internationalization of the Society of Jesus. At Jesuit schools, the students had the chance to observe that strange animal, the foreigner, and measure him against the official propaganda. And since nationalities were treated equally under the church, individuals too were given an equal opportunity to prove worthy and respectful sons of the church, end quote. And then I add, the chance for daughters to do the same was lamentably a later development. To keep this accessibility and internationalization a priority, the schools were, quote, to cost the society nothing except time and manpower, and the pupil nothing, end quote. Their own constitutions included the stern commandment, quote, no obligations or conditions are to be admitted that would impair the integrity of our principle, which is this, to give freely what we have received freely, end quote. We know that such approaches to tuition changed over time in order to make the system sustainable as it became more institutionalized around the world and as the face of that manpower, quote, eventually shifted in more recent decades from scholastics and priests to an increased presence of lay collaborators and employees, including, of course, women fully manifesting an Ignatian identity in every way. But the underlying commitment to providing opportunity for the disenfranchised remains a central theme which links Jesuit education today with its earliest period. From the nascent days of the US, the Society of Jesus played an integral role in its development on a wide variety of fronts. Jesuits who crossed seas or borders to come here, like Andrew White of England, Isaac Jogues of France, Eusebio Kino of Italy, Jacques Marquette of France, Pierre-Jean de Smet of Belgium, Johannes Baptist of Switzerland, and Michael Nash of Ireland, all obviously immigrants, were pioneers and trailblazers who were moved in diverse ways and with radically different charisms and expertise to help lay the intellectual, spiritual, and in many cases, socio-political and organizational foundation for what would become the United States as we know it today. The fusion of Ignatian spirituality and Renaissance humanism, along with the growing mission of international education, which, while a bit sedentary for Ignatius's original vision of his company, had become so much a part of the society in the intervening years, crossed the Atlantic along with the meager possessions of refugee, emigre, and or missionary Jesuit priests and brothers in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. While Georgetown, that earliest college on the banks of the Potomac, housed both English and American-born Jesuits, St. Louis University was run by Belgians, Alabama, Kentucky, and New York had schools launched by Frenchmen, Woodstock and the seminary in Maryland were run by Neapolitans, and Jesuit schools of the mid and far west had German, Italian, and other immigrant populations in their classrooms and administration from their earliest times. As an example, the founding community at Fordham University in the Bronx was made up of 19 Frenchmen, 11 Irishmen, 6 Canadians, 3 Germans, and 1 Englishman, Spaniard, Belgian, Haitian, and Czechoslovakian, with only 3 American-born Jesuits. In fact, the first rectors were presidents of all but 2 of the 21 current AJCU schools founded in the 19th century were themselves immigrants. This multiculturalism provided the American Jesuit schools a rich and contoured understanding of important themes like universality, home, and mission right from their earliest days. Many of their own had sought refuge in this land of what the Statue of Liberty describes as the mother of exiles, especially in the wake of the Society's suppression and restoration in the 1700s. The Society of Jesus, of course, capital S. The uniquely traumatic ordeal that the order had undergone at the hands of their influential and wealthy enemies, when those suspicious of the society in Portugal, France, and Spain convinced Pope Clement XIV to suppress the Jesuits, helped them recognize the need to carry such an initiative forward, both during and after their forced exile in so many cases. And this leads us to the shores of Lake Michigan. When Arnold Damon, S.J., came from the modern-day Netherlands, first to St. Louis, and then eventually to found what would become Loyola University Chicago, along with St. Ignatius College Prep, he sought to instill these principles in what was then a comparably small but still bustling crossroads region. Our Loyola, too, even with only 7 faculty members in the beginning, prioritized formation and holistic education for those whose families were new to the nation. Those old black and white photos in our archives show lots of Quinns and Kellys and Collinses and O'Donnells. Do not mistake me here for whitewashing this history. I will be the first to admit that the lack of people of color and of women in those photos is frankly disturbing when we look at it today. But even their unsettlingly similar features prove the point in a roundabout way. These people all came from somewhere else. And we have today come a long way. I remember once at a conference at Boston College where I watched the African-American president of Canisius hand the microphone to the African-American president of Holy Cross beneath the severe gaze of a wall full of white 19th and early 20th century Jesuit presidential portraits. And I remember leaning over and remarking to a colleague next to me how exciting was this brave new world into which we are finally moving today. In his educational vision, Damon, all those years ago, was still drawing inspiration from a deep theological wellspring. 62 years after his death, Pope Pius XII would trace some of the Catholic concern for this issue in an important apostolic constitution titled Exul Familia Nazarenthana. There he makes clear, quote, "The emigre Holy Family of Nazareth fleeing into Egypt is the archetype of every refugee family," end quote. They, the Holy Family, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, are to be understood as, quote, "models and protectors of every migrant, alien, and refugee of whatever kind, who, whether compelled by fear of persecution or by want, is forced to leave his native land, his beloved parents and relatives, his close friends, and to seek a foreign soil," end quote. That's Pius XII, not Pope Francis writing that. So it's, it's deeply rooted in the tradition. People are seen in our tradition to both have a right to migrate and a right to not to have to migrate. And the religious liberty buzzword, so dominant in conservative political circles today, must then apply to our right as well as a community to live out our faith when it comes to unambiguous teaching and migration. We can talk more about this later. I think that religious liberty angle is going to be an important one for us in the coming years. Others have argued that as much as the Catholic Church is one holy Catholic and apostolic, it is also migrant. It's as much a characteristic of the Catholic Church as these other famous 4 marks. What does that mean? How is it a migrant church? It's because it is in via, or on the way, as in, say, Madonna della Strada, Our Lady of the Way, an image of deep significance for the original Ignatius and for his loyal and filial descendant holding the papal office today, Pope Francis. Of course, the name of our chapel at the Lakeshore campus. Theologian Peter Fan has gone so far as to rework an admittedly thorny medieval axiomatic claim to argue in Latin, extra migrationem nulla salus, which translates into English, outside of migration, no one is saved. We can imagine neither Jesuit higher education, nor the United States, nor Christianity itself without the inestimably valuable contribution of migrants. All of these protagonists are migrants in some ways. This does not solve every controversy or eradicate the rapacious history of violence, conquest, and exploitation that accompanied our history, whether in the conquistadors, in the Trail of Tears, or the forced migration of millions in the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. But it does argue that a history of our school or of the Catholic faith with which it institutionally aligns itself, right? Both our school and Catholicism, a view that doesn't examine this double helix of educating, especially those on the move, is a faulty one. It's a false framing. We were founded to educate migrants and the children of migrants, and are called to continue to do so even today. However, in this vein, I may surprise some people here because I do, in fact, think we need a wall, a big, beautiful, powerful wall, completely impenetrable. It's the only way that we can make our people great again, recover our true patrimony, and protect our historic culture. And I agree that we ought not to be the ones responsible for its construction, but rather someone else ultimately will be the one underwriting it and will be willing to do so to boot. Quote, "For the Lord said to Jeremiah, if you utter what is worthwhile and not what is vile, then I will make you unto this people into a fortified wall of bronze. They shall fight against you, but they shall not prevail over you. For I am with you to save you and deliver you, says the Lord. I will deliver you out of the hand of the wicked and redeem you from the grasp of the ruthless," end quote, from the prophet Jeremiah. Thus, we are called, as both Christians and Americans, to serve as that prophetic wall of bronze against hatred, racism, fear of the unknown, or protectionism. Hardness of heart and narrowness of mind are not excuses for putting policies ahead of people. We must stand firm against those who tell us to pay no attention to that man behind the curtain, to the myopia infecting a world which is desperately trying to somehow unremember or rationalize away those troublesome words on the Statue of Liberty, forged in the crucible of a world torn asunder by hatred and division. You all know the poem. "Keep ancient lands your storied pomp," cries she with silent lips. "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Do we have the courage to stand as a bronze wall against those intellectual vandals who rush headlong towards this new colossus with pitchforks and crowbars to deface our national identity? Is America, in relationship with her allies around the world, still the mother of exiles, as that poem puts it? How do we balance legitimate concerns about national security and internal peacekeeping with those tired and poor, homeless and tempest-tossed we pledge to welcome, without fear-mongering allegations that they could not be properly vetted? The answer lies in speaking what is worthwhile and not what is vile. And as members of the Loyola community, we are called to recognize the value and dignity of all God's people, especially the most vulnerable, the bruised, hurting, and dirty, the same adjectives that Pope Francis uses to describe the church as a field hospital can be seen in the faces of Syrian children or Venezuelan mothers or Haitian workers. We must offer our time, talent, and treasure in support of those in the shadows of death. We cannot fall prey to false narratives where all victims of war and climate change and violent economic systems are equal, but some victims are more equal than others, to borrow an Orwellian phrase. Can Christians see in the church and its partners like Loyola a reflection of those divine attributes we acknowledge with all the children of Abraham? A defense for the defenseless, a refuge in the day of distress, a fortress, a shield, and a stronghold. For, as the prophet Isaiah puts it, the breath of the ruthless is no more than rain against such a wall. Let us always remember that we are that wall, and thus make Ignatian witness great again. So now I'm going to turn it for a few minutes to Aleja to say a bit about what this looks like in more practical contemporary pastoral practice, given her expertise.
Thank you, Mike, for your knowledge and reflections about the history of the Jesuits, and also how is the connection of our connection with the migration in these cases. As Michael said, I'm going to talk about very general and broad topics about how migration in the USA today remains central and complex issue, shaped by like the variety of global and domestic factors. We have to think about migration patterns, how and reflect not only in the economic and political dynamics, but also humanitarian crisis, environmental changes, and even evolving international relationships. As well, it includes a pastoral response of the role of the religious organizations, as Loyola is one of them, and particularly the church in supporting migrants is very significant because they only can provide immediate relief and in a long-term integration assistance. So it is kind of like not only a secret that the United States has been a destination for migrants for centuries, but we can identify today migration patterns that kind of like diversified and are influenced by a variety of factors like economic opportunities, political instability in our countries, violence, climate change, which is huge today, and different parts of the world. And in that way, there's different groups that we need to consider when we talk about migration and understand what are those groups coming. So let me mention a couple of them, like undocumented immigrants. There's a number of undocumented immigrants in the USA that has fluctuated over time. As 2023 estimates that approximately between 11 million and 12 million undocumented individuals in the USA, which is one of the largest population coming from Latin America. But there is also significant numbers also coming from Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. Many of these individuals enter the USA without authorization, but others may overstay with their visas or their authorizations that they have coming to the USA. Also, there is the group of refugees and asylum seekers. The USA government has been like a destination for refugees fleeing conflict, persecution, and humanitarian rights abuses in different countries around the world. So the number of refugees admitted into the USA is determined by annual presidential determination. In recent years, that number has been significantly lower than previous decades, I should say that, and partly due to the changes in administrations, refugee policies that have happened through these latest years. For example, in 2021, the US accepted about 11,000 refugees, which is a sharp decrease from historical heights. I think the highest population was in 1890s, which is like kind of like about 14.8% of the population was an immigrant, and right now we're like in 14.3, which is not difference, but it's still the largest back in that time. Also, we need to mention kind of like the type of visas that the US government kind of like gives to different people around the world, which is like non-immigrant visas for those who are like under work visas, study visas, tourism or cultural exchange programs, immigrants visas that are kind of like the ones who granted individuals that are intended to live permanently in the USA. And they're typically sponsored by from a family member or an employer. Which is kind of like how it has increased a lot in numbers in the latest years. And humanitarian visas, which are granted for individuals who are like basically in danger, or including refugees, asylum seekers, or those who has a status of TPS, which means temporary protected status, for another type of humanitarian visas for individuals that are experiencing kind of like a specific temporary crisis in their own countries, like Ukraine, for example. And also the latest group that I want to mention today is like the family reunification. There's a significant portion of migration in the USA that is driven by family reunification, because there's a lot of people who come to the States, kind of like getting for a hope, and then their hope is to bring also their families, and the government kind of like is helping in some ways to get that family reunification in the States. So understanding that, let's check in the importance of what is the church pastoral role in migration, and in which ways the religious organizations, particularly the Christian churches in the United States, have historically playing a crucial role supporting migrants. I gotta say that the pastoral role for support migration addresses both immediately humanitarian needs for migrants, but also in the long-term challenges of integration for community building. As well, we have to mention that interfaith organizations, which is very important, also contribute to this effort, kind of like recognizing that the shared values of compassion and justice across religions, traditions. Churches very often, among the first institutions, kind of like offer aid to migrants, particularly in regions that with high numbers of newcomers, California, Texas, other borders around the United States. But like the primarily kind of like effort that they offer is shelters, food, medical assistance, legal support, and very often are found through the churches or the different religious organizations around it. As I mentioned before, religious communities, or many different religious communities, kind of like are driven by their teachings of compassion and social justice, where helps that they're advocates for fair and humane integration policies. So that's why we often see religious organizations kind of like advocating for immigration reform or human rights, which kind of like it speaks about the against the policies or practices that kind of like violates rights of migrants and with their families, with detentions, with criminalizations of migration status. So basically, the church pastoral role is not only about providing immediate relief, but also about supporting migrants in their long-term integration into American society. Um, Churches often play a huge role about language and education, offering English classes, offering kind of like education support, especially when there is children related to it. Also, cultural and social integration. I think one of the biggest kind of like challenge when you're a migrant is helping the migrants to adapt to a new environment, fostering social connections, providing cultural orientations for programs, acclimating to the different weather that they might have with the different countries. But also community building is kind of like what many churches create spaces where migrants can build a sense of belonging and identity, and they find opportunities for worship or to find a cultural support, social gatherings, and kind of like supporting each other in their own journeys. Um, and also, we cannot deny that with an increasingly diverse and pluralistic society today, the church has a role in migration that intersects with the world of faith traditions, including Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, and many other kind of like faith traditions. So interfaith coalitions and partnerships strengthen to the humanitarian response in a different way, but also that bring in their own resources, networks, and perspectives to address the needs of migration. I want to talk about a little bit of how one of the central values of Catholic theology, and particularly the Jesuit theology, is the belief of the fundamental dignity of every person, and is that if we are all made in the image of God. This foundation is the church pastoral response to migrants, and regardless of their migration status, background, or challenge, every person is to be treated with profound respect and compassion and dignity for the migrants, and it is non-negotiable. And I want to repeat that this is not negotiable, and it cannot diminish for by their legal status or their past or anything else. Dignity is something huge into the values of the Catholic Church, or any church, I should say. One of the key elements that kind of like are provided by the Catholic social teaching is the option for the poor, which stresses kind of like the church particular concern for the marginalized and vulnerable people, and that includes migrants, refugees, asylum seekers. And it linked with the Jesuit pastoral care emphasizes that there is a preferential option and understanding for those who are poor, oppressed, or displaced, and those are which we consider are the closest to the heart of God. This call for this holistic approach to the pastoral responses, kind of like see the migrants not simply as someone to be helped, but someone to be a companion in their journey, offering not only material things but also spiritual support, which is very important. And if we want to link that with a crucial aspect of the Jesuit pastoral approach, which is accompaniment, is walking with the migrant, not just like here's a piece of clothing, here's a piece of food, but like kind of like providing assistance from the distance. And accompaniment involves a personal commitment to the journey alongside individuals, families, and a whole community through their struggles. I think it reflects the deeper sense of solidarity that forms the heart of the church and responders to seek not to fix or to save or to evangelize, if you will to see it that way, but to help to navigate their challenge with dignity, with love, with respect, with empathy. So I think it means that we talk about solidarity, which is in the Jesuit pastoral care calls for the solidarity with the migrant. Kind of like seeing that or understanding that perspective from our Jesuit community, it can help us to understand and recognize that the migrant as a sister or a brother, part of a larger human family, and kind of like how solidarity is standing with migrants in their troubles, advocating for justice, helping them to build a community, and recognize that they need to have the sense of belonging where they're welcome and value, not just like a piece of person that I wanna help because I provide a type of clothes, but their value and recognize and welcome. Saying that, I want to kind of like approach how the Jesuit theology have a specific guiding principles, and I think you in the university have heard about these concepts like magis or the cura personalities. But I want to link on how these pastoral responses, particularly in the context of migration. So for magis, which is meaning the more, kind of like calls Jesuits or anyone in this institution following the Jesuit values to always strive for a greater commitment of excellence in their service. In this context of pastoral care for migrants, Magis means going beyond the basic needs, kind of like to seek the greater justice, inclusion, and transformation for them. It means that not is not setting for a minimal response, but striving for a response that kind of is more comprehensive, just and dignified as possible that they can offer. As I mentioned before, kind of like full shelter, but also healthcare is kind of like a significant challenge for migrants, especially undocumented ones, because they don't have they feel afraid or they don't have the kind of like resources to go. So kind of like how can we provide that? Or legal support, navigating the USA immigration system is super overwhelming and confusing sometimes, and particularly for those who are with the lack of language or with the lack of kind of like information or knowledge about this. So kind of like go for more, offering the emotional and practical support. And the second term about the Jesuit principle is cura personalis. And it is the Jesuit commitment to care for the whole person, not just one aspect of it, body, mind, spirit. And this principle calls for a holistic approach that addresses not only the immediate needs for food and shelter, but also the emotional, psychological, and spiritual needs for the migrant. Many migrants experience trauma, fear, loss in their journeys coming to United States, and often involved in suffering. So coming from it, kind of like seeing what is the desolation and how can we provide some consolations for migrants, especially when they're coming from a environment of violence, persecution, extreme poverty, of experiencing trauma in many ways. So the psychological, emotional, and spiritual effects, it's how can we approach from that perspective of cura personalis. Given these kind of like principles that the Jesuit ministries engage for a variety of activities, kind of like um, I wanna point a couple services that Loyola University, or kind of like how specifically and practically Loyola University is deeply committed to support migrants and undocumented students through academic, legal, pastoral initiatives, and of course rooted in the Jesuit traditions of service, solidarity, and social justice. I think Loyola's approach for migration focuses not only on the offering direct support, but also advocating for a system change. And the university has established different programs that support the academic, the legal, the emotional, and the spiritual needs for undocumented immigrants, particularly students, and to equip them to make a positive impact with their communities. Um, so first, I want to start with the IPS, the Institute of Pastoral Studies, which kind of like is a leading resource for pastoral formation and theological educations in the Jesuit traditions. IPS offers several programs that are specifically addressed for pastoral needs of migrants, including training ministers, chaplains, and social justice advocates to accompany migrant populations. The second place that I will go for is mission and integration, that includes campus ministry and community service in action and accompaniment. And I think Loyola's mission and integration division offers the pastoral care, emotional support, and community building initiatives. We recognize the faith and spirituality that can play a huge and impactful role helping students navigating their stress, uncertainty, overwhelming trauma that often accompanies migration and living without a full legal status in this country. This division also acts as a bridge of resources and helps students to find guidance when navigating academically, professional, and social challenges tied to their other migration, tied to their and others' migration status. For example, we offer different programs like Lavre, the Food Pantry, Loyola for Chicago, retreats, and different individual accompaniment from a spiritual direction, and kind of like spiritual exercises that is kind of like one of the biggest gifts that the Jesuit community has given to the world. The third place that I want to go mention is the Latin Law Student Association, LLSA, and advocacy programs. The Latin Law Student Association at Loyola Schools Law is a committed support and needs for Latino and undocumented students by providing opportunities for legal training and advocacy. They also work with to raise awareness of challenges that undocumented individuals faces, including discrimination, migration policies, and legal hurdles. And also the School of Social Work, kind of like at Loyola, also contributes to university support for migrant populations by preparing students to engage with vulnerable communities, including undocumented migrants, with their kind of like different programs as immigrant and refugee support and the community outreach program. Um, there's also from the CDI department or division a program that is called USP, Undocumented Student Program, kind of like it's a campus-wide initiative designed to foster Ramblers community, building awareness to the related undocumented students' experiences at Loyola, and kind of like to support the inclusion of undocumented students. And finally, but not kind of like the less important, all of the programming are important, but I want to shout out for the medical school and support for students. Loyola's University Chicago Stritch School of Medicine is committed to ensure that undocumented students, including those with DACA status, have access to medical education and can continue their professional development in the healthcare field. The school offers programs and initiatives that support undocumented students and their medical career aspirations. It's not like, oh no, because I don't have documents, I cannot go and pursue my practicals, my internship, my residency. No, Loyola was the first program in the USA admitting undocumented students to pursue their professional dream. And I have to say that because of that, many other programs around the United States opened like for other students in the same way. And also this effort kind of like uh, was extended not only for the medical school, but also for all the campuses at Loyola University. So thanks for the medical school and those who made the effort to get and make this initiative possible back in 2013 or 2012. So in conclusion, and before we open the space for questions and um, comments, if you will. Loyola University always demonstrate a comprehensive and passionate approach to migration and undocumented students by combining pastoral care, academic support, legal advocacy, community building efforts to continue creating paths of dignity to everyone. And I think I speak for both of us, Michael. We cannot be more proud of and happy to be part of like this effort and these initiatives to support others in their journey of dignity.
Well, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Really appreciate your efforts.